The attic smelled of dust and old summers. Golden shafts of light filtered through cracks in the wooden rafters, catching the lazy swell of particles in the air. Margaret Lewis, 58 now, knelt on creaking boards, her knees pressing into the splintered wood as she sorted through cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly against the far wall. She hadn't planned to come up here. Her parents' house had sat empty for nearly a year, and today was just supposed to be about clearing out junk, old Christmas ornaments, forgotten photo albums, and boxes filled with clothes no one wore anymore. But then she found the shoebox. It was shoved behind a stack of water-stained photo albums, wrapped in brittle masking tape gone yellow with time. Her breath caught as she pulled it forward, the tape peeling reluctantly with a dry, papery hiss. On the lid, in faded black marker, was a single word. Debbie. Margaret froze. She hadn't said her sister's name out loud in years. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside were little fragments of a life cut short. A dried daisy, its petals brittle and pale. A photograph of two girls, herself and Deborah Debbie Lewis, arms slung around each other, laughing at something outside the frame. A folded, yellowed letter, edges crumbling from age. She hesitated before opening it, as if some part of her already knew what it would contain. The attic was silent, save for the cicadas buzzing faintly outside and the rhythmic creak of the old farmhouse settling on its foundation. The handwriting inside was unmistakable. Slanted, a little messy, Debbie had always rushed when she wrote, like the words couldn't get onto the paper fast enough. Margaret's lips moved silently as she read. If anything happens to me, it's Gary. He says he won't let me leave him, but I can't stay. I feel like someone's watching me. Please, don't believe him if he says I ran away. Margaret's breath left her in a ragged sob, the attic spinning for a moment. She steadied herself on the box, knuckles white, tears threatening to fall. Debbie had been missing since October 12, 1979. 44 years. Margaret clutched the letter like a lifeline as the memories surged. The phone call, the endless searches through the woods, the quiet dinners where no one said her sister's name. The case had grown cold decades ago. The sheriff's office stopped calling. Reporters stopped knocking. Eventually, even the neighbors stopped whispering. And now, after all these years, Debbie was speaking again. Margaret drove straight to the Millfield Sheriff's Department, the letter trembling in her hand the entire way. The same road she and Debbie used to ride their bikes down in the summer now felt haunted, every bend in the asphalt holding echoes of the past. Inside, she placed the letter on the counter like it was something fragile, something holy. Detective Ryan Hale, barely old enough to remember the 90s, frowned as he unfolded the brittle paper. His eyes moved quickly over the words, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. This changes everything, he murmured. The investigation, long dormant, roared back to life overnight. Boxes of old files were hauled out of storage, their edges frayed and labels faded. Crime scene photos, yellowed newspaper clippings, typed witness statements on curling paper, all of it suddenly relevant again. But it wasn't just the letter. Technology had changed since 1979. Forensics had evolved. DNA testing could do what small-town detectives back then never could. Evidence collected decades ago, cigarette butts, fibers, fingerprints, would finally have a voice. And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, the man Debbie had feared most had built an entirely new life. Gary Mitchell. Ex-mechanic. Twice divorced. A new name now. A new state. A man who thought the past had buried itself along with its secrets. But Debbie's words had surfaced. And with them, the storm he'd been hiding from for 44 years. For nearly half a century, the small town of Millfield lived with questions it could never answer. What happened to Debbie Lewis on that October night in 1979? Who took her dreams, her laughter, her life? And why did it take a single forgotten letter, found in an attic, to finally bring the truth into the light? The sound of cicadas fades into silence. Some secrets don't stay buried. And sometimes, the dead find a way to speak. Long before she became a name in cold case files, Deborah Debbie Lewis was just Debbie. 23 years old in the fall of 1979, she was the kind of person who made a place warmer simply by being in it. Friends remembered her laugh, loud, a little snorty, the kind you couldn't help but join in on. She wore bell-bottom jeans, oversized sweaters, and faded canvas sneakers scuffed from long walks along back roads. She lived with her parents and younger sister Margaret in Millfield, Ohio, a quiet rural town where the only traffic jams happened when tractors crossed Main Street and the night air always smelled faintly of cut hay. In a place like Millfield, where everyone knew everyone's business, Debbie managed to feel bigger than the town itself. She wanted more than cornfields and factory work. She dreamed of Chicago. A young woman full of plans. Debbie had saved up for nearly 2 years, waitressing at the Clover Diner, the only 24-hour spot in town. Regulars would sit at the counter sipping burnt coffee and teasing her about moving to the big city. Carol Benson, friend, dramatized. She'd talk about Chicago like it was this magical place where anything was possible. She wanted to study graphic design, open a little art studio. Said she wanted to make something beautiful before she turned 30. Art was Debbie's escape. Her bedroom walls were covered in sketches, fields, abandoned barns, portraits of her friends. One half-finished canvas rested in the corner the night she disappeared, the faint outline of a storm rolling over Ohio farmland. That canvas would sit untouched for 4 to 4 years. The sisterly bond. For Margaret, Debbie wasn't just a sister, she was her anchor. Margaret, 3 years younger, idolized her. Debbie taught her how to braid her hair, how to sneak out after curfew without creaking the floorboards, and how to dream bigger than the town they grew up in. In interviews, Margaret always pauses when talking about Debbie's last months. She presses her lips together, her hands tightening in her lap. Margaret, 2023 interview, dramatized. She was different. Not unhappy, exactly. Just distracted. Some nights I'd find her sitting by the window, smoking, staring out at the road. I'd ask what was wrong, and she'd just say, "I'm fine, Maggie. Don't worry." It wasn't like Debbie to keep secrets. But in the weeks before she vanished, her phone calls got shorter, her smile faded quicker, and there was one name Margaret kept overhearing late at night, Gary. Enter Gary Mitchell. Gary Mitchell was 34. A local mechanic, recently divorced, and known for his quick temper. He worked out of a small garage just off State Route 32, the kind of place where you could smell motor oil a block away. Debbie met him when her old Chevy Nova stalled out near the diner. Gary offered to fix it for next to nothing. From there, things moved fast, too fast, according to her friends. Angela Martin, co-worker at the Clover Diner. At first she was giddy. Said he made her feel like someone finally saw her. But a month in, we started noticing the bruises. Little ones at first. She'd laugh them off, say she was clumsy. But we all knew Gary had a temper. Friends warned her. Margaret begged her to slow down. Debbie would always answer the same way. "You don't know him like I do." The last photograph. There's a photo the family keeps framed on Margaret's mantel, taken in August 1979, just 2 months before Debbie vanished. In it, Debbie stands barefoot on the dock at Claywater Lake, wearing cut-off shorts and a striped tank top, her curls wild from the humid summer air. She's holding a sparkler, smiling wide, but her eyes tell a different story. Margaret still remembers the moment it was taken. Margaret. I asked her that day if she was okay. She smiled for the camera, but when I turned it off, she said, "Sometimes I feel like someone's following me." At the time, Margaret thought she was joking. Whispers and warnings. Millfield was the kind of town where whispers traveled faster than wind. By September, rumors spread. Gary had been seen yelling at Debbie outside the diner. A neighbor swore they heard glass shattering from Gary's house late one night. Someone spotted Debbie sitting alone in her car by the highway, engine running, tears streaming down her face. But Debbie kept her private battles private. She'd smile at church on Sundays, sketch on napkins at the diner during her breaks, and talk about Chicago like she'd already bought the bus ticket. The letter, foreshadowing. Weeks before her disappearance, Debbie wrote several letters, small notes she'd tuck into journals and sketchbooks. One of those letters, found decades later in the attic, would become the key to solving the case. In it, she hinted at fear. "If anything happens to me, it's Gary. He says I'm his. But I can't live like this anymore." At the time, no one knew the letter existed. Margaret didn't find it until 2023. But looking back, there were signs everywhere that Debbie was trying to leave, sketchbooks filled with city skylines, diner co-workers saying she talked about quitting, and a one-way bus schedule folded inside her wallet. Why her loss shattered the town. Debbie's disappearance was more than just a missing person case. In a place like Millfield, safety was an identity. Kids rode bikes without helmets. Doors stayed unlocked. People waved at strangers on the sidewalk. When Debbie vanished, that sense of safety cracked. Parents warned their daughters not to walk home alone. The diner stopped staying open late. The woods where Debbie's car was found became a place kids whispered about but never entered. Pastor Collins, local pastor, dramatized. "We lost more than a young woman that night. We lost innocence." Folks started looking at their neighbors differently. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had someone to blame. For Margaret, the loss was personal and unending. Margaret. For 44 years, I lived two lives, one where I tried to move forward, and one where I was frozen in 1979, still waiting for her to walk back through that door. The stakes. By painting Debbie's full portrait, the stakes become clear. For her family, 4 decades of unanswered questions. For the community, a haunting reminder that evil can hide behind familiar smiles. For investigators, a chance to prove modern forensics can finally speak for the dead. Debbie's life wasn't just a prelude to tragedy. It was vibrant, messy, filled with hope and contradictions. That's what makes the discovery of her hidden letter so powerful. It's Debbie, reaching out from the past, asking someone, anyone, to listen this time. Fade out on a slow pan across Debbie's untouched bedroom, frozen in time since 1979. The unfinished canvas in the corner. The folded Chicago bus schedule. A sweater draped over the chair. The sound of cicadas swells again, tying us back to the attic discovery from the cold open. Debbie Lewis was more than a case file. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. And she tried to warn us. But no one listened. Not in time. It was the first week of October, 1979. Autumn had finally crept into Millfield, Ohio, the air sharp with wood smoke, the leaves crunching underfoot. Debbie loved this time of year. She always said fall felt like a fresh start, and everyone who knew her believed she was on the brink of one. In the weeks before her disappearance, Debbie had been making plans, quitting her job at the Clover Diner, moving to Chicago, and leaving Gary Mitchell behind for good. But the closer she got to freedom, the more her life started to unravel. Monday, October 8, 1979. Debbie clocked in for the late shift at the diner that night. The place smelled of burnt coffee and fried eggs, the jukebox buzzing faintly in the corner. Angela Martin, her co-worker, remembers Debbie was quieter than usual. Angela dramatized. She was wiping down tables, but she kept looking out the window, like she was expecting someone. Or avoiding someone. When I asked what was wrong, she just said, nothing. Just tired. But Debbie didn't get tired like that. Around 10:30 p.m., Gary Mitchell walked in. He didn't order anything. He just stood by the counter, arms crossed, eyes locked on Debbie. Angela remembers the tension. Angela. I told her I could handle the tables if she wanted to take a break, but she said no. She didn't want to leave me alone out there with him. Gary stayed less than 5 minutes, but his stare followed Debbie the rest of the night. Tuesday, October 9, 1979. Debbie spent the morning sketching in her bedroom. Margaret still remembers walking in and seeing the unfinished drawing, a city skyline with storm clouds rolling in. Margaret, 2023. She kept talking about Chicago, like she was already there. But that morning she seemed unsettled. She kept checking the window, like she heard something outside. That afternoon, a neighbor, Ruth Gardner, spotted Debbie and Gary arguing in the parking lot behind the diner. Ruth told police she couldn't hear everything, but she heard one line clear as day. Gary, quoted from Ruth's 1979 statement. If you walk away from me, you'll regret it. Debbie brushed it off later when Margaret asked about it. Gary just doesn't like letting things go. She smiled when she said it. But Margaret would later realize it wasn't a real smile. Wednesday, October 10, 1979. The day Debbie stopped talking about Chicago. Angela remembers Debbie rushing through her shift, distracted, constantly glancing at the diner's front door. She burned 2 orders and nearly dropped a coffee pot. At around 7 p.m., Debbie received a phone call at the diner. Angela says she stepped into the back office to take it, but when she came out, her face was pale. Angela. I asked who it was. She wouldn't say. She just whispered, I need to get out of here. That night, Debbie wrote in her journal, one of the last entries ever recovered. I know I need to leave. Chicago's waiting. But he said if I go, he'll find me. He always finds me. Thursday, October 11, 1979. Debbie took the morning off to drive to Columbus, 2 hours away. Investigators later discovered she'd withdrawn $320 from her savings, almost everything she had. A one-way bus schedule to Chicago was found in her wallet years later, folded neatly between receipts. Angela says Debbie came into work that night humming softly, almost nervously cheerful. Angela. I think she thought she was finally getting out. But then Gary showed up again, leaning against his truck outside. Didn't even come in, just watched her through the window. A regular at the diner, Frank Doyle, later told police he saw Gary's truck following Debbie's Chevy Nova after her shift. Friday, October 12, 1979, the night she vanished. Debbie clocked out at 11:08 p.m. It was one of those cold, silent nights where sound travels strangely far. The roads were slick with fallen leaves, the woods along Route 32 dark and endless. Margaret remembers Debbie calling home around 11:30. Margaret. She said she was heading straight back, that she'd be home before midnight. She sounded normal. Calm, even. It was the last time anyone in her family ever heard her voice. Witness sightings. The timeline after she left the diner gets murky. 11:40 p.m., a gas station attendant in Hocking State Forest says he saw Debbie's Nova stop briefly for gas. She looked tense, glancing over her shoulder. He remembers a dark pickup truck idling near the pumps. 12:15 a.m., a trucker claims he saw Debbie's car pulled over on the shoulder near mile marker 22. He thought she was fixing something under the hood. He didn't stop. 12:30 a.m., a local couple reported hearing screaming somewhere deep in the woods behind their property. They didn't call police. Conflicting stories. Gary Mitchell told investigators he was playing poker at a friend's house all night, a rock-solid alibi backed by 3 witnesses. But decades later, those same friends would change their stories. In 1979, though, the alibi was enough to keep suspicion at bay. Saturday, October 13, 1979, the silence begins. By morning, Debbie's bed was empty. Her purse, sketchbooks, and favorite sweater were gone. Her car was missing. Margaret remembers the panic setting in immediately. Margaret. I called the diner. I called Angela. I called everyone I could think of. Nobody had seen her. That's when Mom went straight to the sheriff. Sheriff's deputies organized a search party that same afternoon. Dozens of volunteers combed the woods. Helicopters scanned the forest canopy. Bloodhounds followed her scent for nearly half a mile, before it vanished near an old logging road. By Sunday, rumors were swirling. She'd run away to Chicago. She'd been kidnapped. Gary had done something to her. But without a body, without evidence, and with Gary's alibi intact, the case stalled almost immediately. The weight of a final week. Looking back, the pieces are all there, the bruise Debbie didn't explain, the bus schedule tucked into her wallet, the warnings from friends she ignored, and Gary's chilling line. If you walk away from me, you'll regret it. At the time, though, no one connected the dots. Not until decades later, when the attic letter surfaced, would investigators finally see the pattern hiding in plain sight. The screen goes dark as we hear the sound of cicadas and tires crunching over gravel. A faint door slam. Then silence. Debbie Lewis thought she had one more night, one more drive home, one more chance to leave Millfield behind. But someone else had other plans. And by the time the sun rose over Hocking State Forest, Debbie was gone. The morning of August 18, 2021, began like any other in the quiet mountain town of Moab, Utah. The air was crisp, the sky a washed-out blue, and the rising sun cast long shadows over the La Salle Mountains. Hikers were out early, chasing the cool of dawn, while RVs lined the edge of town, their owners sipping coffee and preparing for another day under the desert sun. But beneath the surface calm, something was wrong. The initial call. At 11:32 a.m., the Grand County Sheriff's Office received a call from a local camper near the La Salle Loop Road, reporting what he described as a strong, foul odor and a strange sight in a wooded area off a dirt path. Something's dead out here, the man said. At first, I thought maybe a deer, but, no. You're gonna want to come out here. Deputy Mike Stevens was dispatched. At first, he wasn't alarmed. Calls about animal carcasses weren't uncommon in the area, especially during the summer months. But when he arrived and saw the camper pacing near his truck, pale and jittery, a sense of dread settled in his stomach. Approaching the site. Stevens parked his cruiser at the edge of the dirt road. The air was still, unnaturally so. As he stepped out, the heat hit him like a wall, mingling with the stench the caller had warned about. Show me, Stevens said quietly. The camper led him down a narrow path bordered by sagebrush and juniper trees. They walked maybe 200 feet before Stevens stopped. He could already see them, 2 figures lying side by side in the dirt, partially obscured by undergrowth. Even from a distance, Stevens knew. First impressions. He radioed in immediately. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need backup. Possible double homicide. Send investigators, medical, the whole team. As he approached, he noted the positions of the bodies carefully, trying not to disturb anything. Keelan Schultz lay on her back, one arm twisted unnaturally beneath her her faded bandana still tied loosely around her neck. Beside her, Crystal Turner was curled on her side, as if she had been trying to protect herself. Both had visible gunshot wounds. Their silver Kia Sorento was parked not far away, doors locked, windows rolled up, as though they'd left it untouched in their final moments. Scattered camping gear, a stove, utensils, 2 sleeping bags, told the story of an evening that had started normally and ended in horror. Securing the scene. Within half an hour, the area was crawling with law enforcement. Sheriff's deputies taped off a perimeter while the Utah State Crime Lab was called in. Detective Alejandro Ramirez arrived at 12:45 p.m., stepping out of his SUV and surveying the scene with a grim expression. He was a seasoned investigator, but even he paused before crossing under the tape. "Make sure nobody touches a damn thing," he ordered. "This entire area is evidence now." Details emerge. Forensic specialists began documenting everything. Keelan's injuries, 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and another to the back. Crystal's injuries, a single gunshot wound to the head. Distance, based on shell casings, the shooter stood within 10 feet. Weapon, preliminary analysis suggested a 9mm handgun, though the weapon itself wasn't recovered. Something else disturbed investigators: there were no signs of robbery. The couple's wallets, phones, and camping gear were untouched. This wasn't random. Connecting the dots. As the investigation deepened, detectives learned that Keelan and Crystal had been living a free-spirited life, moving between campsites near Moab. But in the days leading up to their deaths, they'd confided in friends and co-workers that something was wrong. One friend recalled. Keelan said there was a creepy guy camping near them. She said they might move spots because he made them uncomfortable. Those words now rang louder than ever. Whoever that creepy guy was, he had found them again. The media descends. By late afternoon, word had spread. The usually peaceful tourist town of Moab became the center of a growing media storm. Reporters swarmed the sheriff's office, demanding answers. Sheriff Daniel Carter held a brief press conference. At approximately 11:32 a.m., deputies responded to a report of suspicious activity off La Salle Loop Road. Upon arrival, they discovered 2 deceased individuals, later identified as Keelan Schultz and Crystal Turner. "This is an active investigation. We are treating this as a double homicide. At this time, there is no suspect in custody." Behind his calm demeanor, Carter knew the reality. A killer was on the loose, and the tight-knit Moab community was on edge. Emotional fallout. Back at the Moonflower Community Cooperative, where Keelan had worked, her co-workers gathered in shock. The usually vibrant shop was silent, customers whispering in hushed tones. A friend of Crystal's broke down in tears outside, clutching her phone. "They were so happy," she sobbed. "They loved each other, they loved this town. How could someone do this?" The unsettling clue. Late that evening, as crime scene techs finished their sweep, a detail emerged that shifted the tone of the investigation. About 50 yards from the campsite, investigators discovered fresh footprints, one set larger than the others, likely belonging to a man. They followed them until they vanished at a dirt road where tire tracks indicated a vehicle had been parked. Whoever killed Keelan and Crystal had likely stalked them, waited, and then escaped into the night. A town gripped by fear. By nightfall, Moab was no longer the serene mountain getaway it had been the day before. Parents locked their doors. Campers packed up early. And somewhere, perhaps nearby, a killer blended back into the desert silence. For the detectives, this was only the beginning. But for Keelan and Crystal's families, their nightmare had already begun. The first 48 hours after the discovery of Keelan Schultz and Crystal Turner's bodies were a whirlwind of confusion, suspicion, and conflicting leads. For the Grand County Sheriff's Office, every second mattered, but with few resources and mounting pressure, cracks began to form almost immediately. Monday, August 16, 2021, the scene is locked down. By 10:15 a.m., the desert campsite outside Moab was swarming with activity. Sheriff's deputies cordoned off the area with yellow crime scene tape, and the Utah State Bureau of Investigation dispatched agents to assist. The bodies of Keelan and Crystal had been left where they fell, lying in the brush just 200 feet from their parked Kia van. Detective Tanner Holman knelt near the bodies, taking notes. 2 victims, female, mid-20s, multiple gunshot wounds, he dictated into his recorder. Signs of defensive injuries, bruising on forearms and hands. Clothing suggests they were caught off guard. No signs of sexual assault. The van was searched next. Inside, investigators found clothes, camping gear, and food supplies scattered but intact. A loaded .22 caliber handgun hidden beneath a seat, later confirmed not to be the murder weapon. Keelan's journal, opened to a recent entry describing a creepy man at the campgrounds. 2 lighters, one of them broken, near the campfire ring. Holman's voice hardened as he read the journal entry aloud. Weirdo camping near us, won't stop watching, making Keelan nervous, may move. This became the first significant lead, but it would also fuel a torrent of online speculation in the days ahead. Interviews begin, family, friends, and locals. By noon, investigators began canvassing the La Salle Mountain campgrounds, speaking with anyone who might have seen the couple in their final days. The last confirmed sighting came from a local bartender, Cindy Sue Hunter, who recalled seeing the pair at Woody's Tavern on Saturday, August 14th. They were happy, laughing, having beers. Nothing seemed off, except Keelan mentioned this creepy guy again. She joked about needing to carry a bat. Other campers corroborated this, reporting a strange man lingering around multiple sites, asking invasive questions, and watching women bathe at nearby creeks. But descriptions of the creepy man varied wildly. Some said he was tall, white, with a beard. Others swore he was short, stocky, and clean-shaven. One claimed he drove a dark pickup truck. Another remembered an old van with faded paint. Within hours, the creepy man theory went from lead to wildfire, consuming resources and dominating headlines. Tuesday, August 17th, FBI joins the case. Given the national attention already building online, the FBI joined the investigation early. Special Agent Ryan Webb led a small team tasked with profiling the killer. 2 young women, isolated location, multiple gunshots. This is personal, Webb told reporters. The shooter wanted them dead. We're looking at someone in their orbit. This statement instantly widened the suspect pool to include friends, former partners, co-workers, anyone recently in conflict with Keelan or Crystal. Digital warrants were issued for the couple's phones, laptops, and social media accounts. Detectives began digging into every text message and DM. Suspect number 1, the unknown camper. The mysterious creepy man remained the most obvious lead, but investigators couldn't locate him. A surveillance review from Moab gas stations and stores between August 12th to 15th yielded no matches. Deputies even hiked remote trails around the campgrounds looking for abandoned campsites, but nothing. Still, this theory stuck. Local Facebook groups exploded with speculation. Photos of random men camping near Moab were shared and scrutinized. Rumors spread faster than facts, and tips flooded the sheriff's tip line, many conflicting or outright false. Suspect number 2, former partners. Detectives next turned to the couple's relationship histories. Both Keelan and Crystal had previous partners before meeting each other, and investigators considered jealousy as a possible motive. Keelan's ex-girlfriend was located and interviewed in Salt Lake City. She had a solid alibi. Crystal's former boyfriend was living out of state and was quickly ruled out via time-stamped employment records. No leads here, but the process drained resources and added frustration. Wednesday, August 18th, enter the Petito case. Just as investigators tried to focus, another storm hit. Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie, a young couple traveling cross-country, had been reported missing. Their last known argument? Outside the Moonflower Co-op in Moab, the exact same store where Keelan worked. The timeline overlapped. Gabby and Brian's public fight, August 12th. Keelan and Crystal last seen alive, August 14th. Their bodies discovered, August 18th. The internet exploded with theories linking the 2 cases. But investigators found no connection between Petito, Laundrie, and the double homicide. Still, this coincidence drew national media to Moab, placing the sheriff's office under a microscope. Processing the evidence. Back at the Utah State Crime Lab, every piece of physical evidence was being processed. Ballistics. The bullets recovered matched a 9mm handgun. Shell casings. 4 were found near the bodies, suggesting a semi-automatic weapon. DNA. Swabs from beneath Keelan's fingernails yielded an unknown male profile. The discovery of male DNA injected new urgency. Whoever killed them had been close, physically, emotionally, or both. Investigative dead ends. Despite early momentum, the case began stalling. Hundreds of tips led nowhere. No one matched the creepy man description. The 9mm handgun remained untraced. The couple's phones provided no evidence of threats. Sheriff Stephen White expressed frustration at a press conference. We're working around the clock. We have more than a dozen investigators on this. We owe it to Keelan and Crystal to get it right. But we need patience. Patience, however, was wearing thin. Theories begin to split. By the end of the first week, law enforcement had two competing theories. Random camper theory. A drifter with a gun stumbled upon Keelan and Crystal. He made them uncomfortable, escalated an argument, then killed them. Fits the journal entry, but lacks hard evidence. Targeted attack theory. Someone the couple knew personally pulled the trigger. Fits the multiple close-range shots and defensive wounds. Suggests deeper secrets in their social circle. With no arrests, no suspects, and mounting public criticism, the investigation stood at a crossroads. On August 20th, just 4 days after the discovery, an unexpected lead arrived. A local mechanic reported seeing a young man washing blood off his truck at a car wash just outside Moab on the morning of August 16th, the same morning Keelan and Crystal's bodies were likely left in the canyon. When deputies pulled the surveillance footage, their blood ran cold. The man matched one of the creepy man descriptions. But by the time they identified the plate number, the vehicle was gone. The investigation is stalling. Leads have dried up, and the weight of time is crushing both the detectives and the families. We shift focus from the procedural aspects of the case to the emotional aftermath, the frustration, anger, and quiet devastation that ripple through the victims' loved ones. A year later. Setting, a cold winter afternoon, 1976. The Schultz family home. The camera lingers on a photo of Keelan as soft sunlight filters through lace curtains. A year had passed since that August night. A year of unanswered questions. A year of waiting by the phone, of hoping every knock on the door would finally bring closure. But as weeks turned into months, hope became something else, something heavier. Keelan's father, Sean Schultz, now looks like he's aged a decade in 1 year. His hair has more gray, his shoulders slumped lower. At the kitchen table, Keelan's younger sister, barely 16, stares at an untouched bowl of cereal. On the fridge, Keelan's smiling face beams from a missing person flyer, the edges curled and yellowed with time. Sean, softly, to himself. They said they'd find her killer. They promised. The silence is suffocating. Crystal's mother speaks. Setting, a modest church basement turned support group meeting. About a dozen people sit in a circle of folding chairs. Crystal's mother, Angela Turner, clutches a framed photo of her daughter, speaking through tears. Angela. Every time the phone rings, I think, maybe it's them. Maybe they've found him. But it's always nothing. Always still working on it. My baby's gone, and I can't even sleep at night knowing whoever did this is still out there, walking free. The other parents nod. Some dab at their eyes. Others stare at the floor, trapped in their own spirals of grief. This isn't just Crystal and Keelan's story anymore. It's a wound tearing through entire families, leaving no one untouched. Detectives hitting walls. Setting, the county sheriff's office, late at night. Papers cover every inch of Detective Alejandro Ramirez's desk. He rubs his temples, frustration evident. Ramirez. Every lead goes nowhere. Every suspect checks out. It's like whoever did this, vanished into thin air. The local police are stretched thin. The department lacks modern forensic tools. There's no DNA database, no digital footprint to trace. This is 1976 small-town policing at its most limited. Files pile up. Dead ends multiply. Ramirez's marriage begins to strain under the pressure. While the families suffered in silence, investigators drowned in dead leads. Every path they followed led to shadows. Every name crossed off the list left them with fewer answers, and more questions. Media frenzy fades. At first, the case drew national headlines. 2 young women, brutally murdered near a campground. It was the kind of mystery that gripped America. But as time passed and no arrest came, the reporters packed up. News vans stopped coming. The cameras moved on to fresher tragedies. For the families, it felt like abandonment. Angela Turner, in a taped interview, 1977. First they call every day. Then once a week. Then nothing. It's like my daughter stopped existing to the world, but not to me. Never to me. The toll on relationships. Grief isn't linear. It's messy. It drives wedges between people who once leaned on each other. Keelan's parents eventually separated. Crystal's older brother spiraled into addiction. Sean stopped fishing, something he used to love, because being out on the water reminded him too much of his missing daughter. Narrator, V.O. Some families broke. Others hardened. But all of them carried the same weight, the crushing absence of justice. A fractured community. Moab, once a quiet, close-knit town, now lived under a cloud of suspicion. Everyone wondered if the killer was someone they knew. Neighbors eyed each other differently. Parents stopped letting their kids camp in the canyons. Local businesses put up flyers offering rewards. Rumors ran rampant: a drifter, a jealous ex, a biker gang. None of it panned out, but the speculation poisoned friendships and trust. Private pain. In a rare moment, we return to Tyrese Brown, Crystal's fiancé. He visits her grave at sunset, kneeling in the cold dirt. He speaks quietly, almost to himself. Tyrese, I still talk to you, like you're here. I don't know how to stop. His hand trembles as he places a single white lily on the headstone. This isn't the loud grief we saw earlier, this is the slow erosion of someone's spirit. A spark of hope, and another dead end. In late 1978, the sheriff's department finally gets a promising tip. A man arrested in Colorado claims to know who killed Keelan and Crystal. Detectives drive 6 hours through the mountains to interview him. It's a lie. He was angling for a lighter sentence on unrelated charges. Ramirez slams the interrogation room door so hard the glass rattles. Ramirez, I'm so damn tired of chasing ghosts. The weight of time. We close with a slow pan across a wall covered in photos, maps, and handwritten notes, a timeline of obsession. Years passed. Birthdays came and went. Seasons changed. And still, 2 young women's voices remained silenced, their families left to wonder if they'd ever know why. For the investigators, it became more than a case. It was a wound that never healed. For the families, it became an open-ended nightmare. And for the killer, it was freedom. Moab is a small town where everyone knows everyone, and when tragedy strikes, whispers move faster than the Colorado River after a storm. In the wake of Keelan Schultz and Crystal Turner's murders, fear and uncertainty seeped into every corner of the community. With no suspect in custody and investigators tight-lipped, speculation became the town's unofficial language. Cafes, bars, hiking trails, and even church gatherings buzzed with theories, each retelling shaping the narrative in its own way. The first rumors. It started at Woody's Tavern, a local watering hole. 2 days after the bodies were found, a man claimed to have seen a strange van parked near the La Salle Mountains around the time of the murders. White, beat up, no plates, he told anyone who would listen. Guy inside had these dead, glassy eyes. Something about him wasn't right. Within hours, the creepy van man became Moab's first urban legend. People swore they'd seen him lurking at gas stations, peering into tents, following hikers. But when deputies followed up, no one could produce a license plate, a clear photo, or even a consistent description. Some said he had tattoos crawling up his neck, others claimed he was clean-shaven, wearing a cowboy hat. The phantom driver became a shapeshifter, molded by fear more than fact. The creepy guy at the campsite. One detail from Keelan's texts ignited even more speculation. She had messaged a friend days before the murders, saying they might move campsites if this creepy guy doesn't leave us alone. That single phrase, creepy guy, was enough to set the rumor mill ablaze. Some locals believed he was a local drifter, known to hang around trailheads. Others swore he was an outsider, a tourist who stumbled into the wrong campground. A few whispered darker theories, that he was tied to other missing persons cases in Utah and Colorado. Detectives never publicly identified this person, but his ghostly presence loomed over the investigation. Parents warned their kids to stay away from the trails after sunset. Campers began sleeping with knives or bear spray under their pillows. The La Salle Mountains, once a place of serenity, started to feel cursed. The cult theories. By mid-September, another legend had taken root. Some residents began connecting the murders to rumors of a desert cult operating near Moab. Locals whispered about shadowy gatherings deep in canyon country, strange fires glowing in the distance, and eerie chanting carried by the wind. At the local co-op, a cashier told reporters, "People go missing out here sometimes, and no one talks about it. Whole communities in the desert living off-grid. You never know who's watching you." There was no evidence of cult involvement, no symbols at the campsite, no ritual markings, nothing concrete. But the idea tapped into a primal fear, that something ancient and unseen might be lurking just beyond the ridgelines, pulling strings no one understood. Hitchhiker shadows. Other stories traced the danger back to the open roads. Moab's highways bring in thousands of seasonal workers, van lifers, and transient travelers each year. To some, the killer wasn't a local at all, but someone just passing through. Campfire conversations buzzed with warnings. Don't pick up hitchhikers. Don't camp alone. Don't talk to strangers. Every suspicious face became a suspect. Every passing RV, a potential killer's den. For many, The scariest possibility wasn't that the murderer was hiding in Moab, but that they were already gone, hundreds of miles away, blending back into the flow of tourists and drifters. Ghosts of the La Salles. For some in Moab, the horror transformed into something supernatural. An old hiking guide, living off-grid for decades, claimed that the area around the campsite was haunted ground, cursed by old conflicts between settlers and native tribes. He told a haunting story over beers at the Moab brewery. This land remembers blood. People who die up there, they don't leave easy. You walk those trails at night, you hear whispers. Sometimes it ain't the wind. Hikers began reporting strange feelings in the La Salles, the sense of being watched, footsteps behind them on empty paths, flickering lights among the trees. Logical explanations existed: wildlife, shifting shadows, overactive imaginations. But in a town drowning in fear, the line between fact and folklore blurred quickly. How the myth shaped the town. These urban legends weren't just harmless ghost stories, they changed how Moab lived and breathed. Tourism dipped slightly in the months after the murders. Campgrounds near the La Salles emptied out. Residents formed informal patrols, driving backroads at night, keeping watch for suspicious vehicles. Facebook groups erupted with amateur sleuths sharing evidence, theories, and wild speculation. Some even doxed innocent people, accusing them publicly of being the creepy guy. The Schultz and Turner families watched this chaos unfold, torn between gratitude that people cared and frustration that the noise often drowned out the facts. For them, this wasn't about Van Men, cults, or haunted mountains, it was about Keelan and Crystal. And every new rumor felt like salt in an open wound. A community haunted. Even today, ask someone in Moab about the case and they'll lower their voice. Some swear the murderer still lives nearby, hiding in plain sight. Others believe he left the moment the bodies were found, never to return. And a few, like the old guide, will tell you the La Salles don't forgive easily, that anyone who sheds blood on those mountains becomes a part of them. The truth, though, is simpler and more terrifying: no one really knows. And in that vacuum of certainty, myths take root. They fill the silence left behind by an unsolved tragedy. For Moab, the legends are more than stories, they're a coping mechanism, a way to make sense of the senseless. Late one night, a lone hiker stood at the edge of the La Salles, looking down at the shadowed valleys where Keelan and Crystal once camped. The wind cut cold, carrying scents of pine and damp earth. Somewhere far below, a coyote howled. For a moment, the hiker swore they heard faint laughter carried on the breeze, soft, distant, gone as soon as it came. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe some tragedies never really leave us. The passage of time can dull memories, but it cannot erase wounds. By the spring of 1987, 12 years after that haunting Washington night, the town of Pinecrest had learned to live with its ghosts, or at least, it tried to. The roadside ditch where the bodies were found had become overgrown with wild grass and moss. Locals called it the Hollow, and most avoided it entirely. Parents warned their kids not to go near it. Teenagers dared each other to walk its edge at night. And yet, every so often, fresh flowers would appear there, quietly, anonymously, and unfailingly. But for the families of Carla Jennings and Melissa Rayburn, there was no moving on. The grief had calcified into something else: anger, distrust, and fatigue. Detective Henry Cole, the same man who had stood over the bodies that summer night in 1975, had since retired. He lived quietly on the outskirts of town, his badge tucked away in a drawer, convinced he'd failed both girls. The case haunted him, but he no longer had the strength to fight it. At least, that's what he told himself, until the day everything changed. A box left unopened. On May 3, 1987, Pinecrest's small police department underwent a renovation. As workers cleared out the crumbling basement archives, one of them came across a dust-caked evidence box shoved behind a sagging shelf. Inside were items long thought lost. A cassette tape with the faded handwriting Jennings, Rayburn, August 75. A blood-stained scarf wrapped in plastic. And, most intriguingly, a roll of undeveloped 35mm film. For 12 years, no one had known these existed. When Detective Emily Vargas, a sharp, relentless investigator in her mid-30s who had recently joined the department, got word of the discovery, she immediately reached out to the state lab. If there was even the faintest trace of DNA, she wanted it tested. That decision would ignite the first real momentum the case had seen in over a decade. Old wounds, new science. By 1987, forensic technology had leapt forward. DNA profiling was still in its infancy but becoming a game-changer. Vargas convinced the state to prioritize the scarf's blood samples. Weeks later, the results came back. The DNA matched neither of the victims. Someone else had bled at the scene. The revelation hit the families like a shockwave. Carla's mother, Donna, now frail and hunched, called Vargas in tears. "Please, don't let them shelve this again. Don't let them forget my baby." Vargas promised she wouldn't. The interview that changed everything. 2 months later, an unexpected breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a retired truck driver named Leonard "Lenny" Griggs. Griggs had spent most of the late 70s and 80s drifting between jobs, but an article about the renewed investigation triggered something in his memory. He walked into the Pinecrest police station one humid July afternoon, smelling of gasoline and tobacco, and said, "I seen something that night, back in '75. Skeptical but desperate, Vargas sat him down in the interview room. Griggs told her that on the night of August 14, 1975, he had been hauling freight up Highway 9 when he passed a beat-up green Chevy Nova pulled onto the shoulder. He remembered it clearly because he saw a man standing by the car, smoking a cigarette, and a second figure slumped in the passenger seat, motionless. He never reported it. Didn't want to get involved, he admitted, scratching the back of his neck. But that car, it had Oregon plates. Never seen it before. Something about it stuck." Vargas cross-referenced old reports. Sure enough, there had been unconfirmed tips about a green Nova back then, but none had led anywhere. With Griggs' statement, she pushed harder, ordering the DMV to reopen records. That's when she found a name that would come to haunt Pinecrest all over again. The return of a shadow. The car had been registered to Richard "Rick" Harlan, a drifter with a petty criminal record who vanished from Pinecrest shortly after the murders. At the time, he'd been interviewed and cleared based on shaky alibis. But Vargas uncovered something disturbing. Harlan had been arrested twice in Oregon for violent assaults between 1978 and 1982. In one case, the victim described him as calm, like he'd done this before. And in both arrests, his DNA was never collected, it wasn't standard yet. For the first time in years, investigators had a name, a car, and a pattern. The catalyst, a phone call from Oregon. Just as Vargas prepared to track down Harlan, a call came in from Benton County, Oregon. A local deputy reported that a man matching Harlan's description had been seen living off-grid in a trailer near the Cascades. Within 48 hours, Vargas and 2 state detectives were on a plane. When they arrived, the trailer was abandoned, but what they found inside shifted the investigation forever. Among the piles of magazines and cigarette burns, there was a showbox filled with Polaroids. Most were landscapes, old diners, and cars. But 6 of them froze Vargas where she stood. Photos of young women at bars and gas stations. Women who looked eerily like Carla and Melissa. The timestamps? All between 1973 and 1975. Harlan hadn't just been passing through Pinecrest. He'd been hunting. When the town awoke, the news spread like wildfire. For the first time in years, Pinecrest buzzed with a tense energy, a cocktail of fear, outrage, and cautious hope. Community meetings were packed. Local reporters camped outside the Jennings and Rayburn's homes. People whispered Harlan's name in the aisles of the grocery store. But the tension was deeper than the case itself. For over a decade, the myths around the Hollow had painted the girls' deaths as something supernatural, a curse, a ghost, a punishment. To have a flesh-and-blood suspect suddenly in their grasp rattled those beliefs. Some clung to the legends. Others demanded Harlan's head. And in the middle stood Vargas, relentless but increasingly exhausted, setting the stage for confrontation. By late September 1987, the investigation had fully shifted gears. A statewide manhunt for Richard Harlan was underway. New forensic evidence was tying him to other unsolved cases across 3 states. The FBI had been called in to assist. For the first time since 1975, Pinecrest felt like it was standing on the edge of answers, but also on the edge of something far darker. Because if Harlan was guilty, he wasn't the only one. Hidden in that showbox was one last Polaroid, one Vargas hadn't shown the press. A blurry image of 2 men standing beside the green Nova. And one of them wasn't Harlan. This was the catalyst. The moment when an old cold case became something far bigger, far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The case lay buried in the dusty archives of the county courthouse for nearly 3 decades. The original boxes, battered, stained, and heavy with silence, were stacked on a forgotten shelf in the basement. Most people thought the investigation had died there, entombed along with the unanswered questions and lingering grief. But in 2012, everything changed. The call that changed everything. Detective Alejandro Ramirez, then a rising star in the county's cold case division, still remembers the moment his desk phone rang. Ramirez, he answered, balancing a cup of burnt station coffee in one hand, a stack of neglected paperwork in the other. On the other end was FBI agent Emily Carter, a name he knew from reputation alone. Meticulous, relentless, a specialist in cases others had given up on. Emily's voice was sharp, urgent. Alejandro, I've been reviewing archived cases for the federal database upgrade. There's something about your 1975 homicide, the Schultz-Turner file. It's missing DNA analysis. Completely. Ramirez frowned. Back in 1975, DNA testing didn't exist, but by 2012, it was the backbone of modern investigations. And yet, nobody had ever resubmitted the evidence for re-examination. Emily didn't mince words. If the samples are still intact, we can finally run them. I need your authorization to pull the box. Within 24 hours, Ramirez was in the courthouse basement, slicing through brittle packing tape, inhaling the smell of decades-old dust and neglect. Inside, beneath faded photographs and hand-scribbled statements, were the preserved items: blood-stained clothing, cigarette butts, a broken bracelet, and a single, carefully sealed envelope labeled, "Do not open, biological evidence." Old wounds, new technology. Forensic science had evolved dramatically since the original investigation. In the 1970s, detectives relied on eyewitness testimony, polygraphs, and intuition. But now? A single skin cell could point to a killer. The biological evidence was sent to the state forensic lab, where analysts prepared to extract touch DNA, something unheard of when Keelan and Crystal's bodies were first discovered. Weeks passed. Then the call came. "Detective Ramirez," the analyst said. "We've got a hit." The DNA profile matched a man already in the federal database, someone who had served time for armed robbery in the late 1980s but had never been linked to a homicide. His name hadn't appeared once in the original investigation files. His name was Manuel Ortega. Bringing in the old guard. Before Ramirez could move forward, he needed context. Why had Ortega's name never surfaced? He tracked down retired Sheriff Bill Hanlon, the lead investigator back in 1975. Hanlon, now 82 years old and living in a small ranch house outside town, was reluctant to revisit the past. Sitting across from Ramirez at a worn oak table, Hanlon's weathered hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. "We looked at every angle back then," Hanlon rasped, "but Ortega? Never crossed my radar. Back in 75, he was just a drifter, passing through." Ramirez slid a photo across the table, a crime scene image showing the torn bracelet found near Keelan's body. Hanlon's eyes lingered on it, softening with memory. "We always thought that bracelet belonged to Crystal," he said slowly. "Turns out it didn't," Ramirez replied. "It had Ortega's DNA on the clasp." Hanlon sat in silence for a long moment, his jaw tightening. The implication was clear. They'd missed something, maybe everything, back then. The families learned the truth. When news broke that the case was being reopened, the Schultz and Turner families were torn between hope and dread. Keelan's younger sister, Rebecca, described the moment she got Ramirez's call. "I froze. For 30 years, we've lived with no answers. Part of me wanted justice, but part of me didn't want to relive it all again." Crystal's mother, now in her 70s, wept openly during a local TV interview. "I never thought I'd see this day. I just pray they finally get it right this time." The renewed media coverage dredged up painful memories, but it also reignited community-wide obsession. For the first time in decades, neighbors debated theories over coffee counters and online forums buzzed with speculation. Ortega, ghosts of a drifter. Manuel Ortega had left Utah in the late 1970s, moving through several western states before resurfacing in Texas, where he served time for robbery. After his release, he lived a transient life. No fixed address, no paper trail, no social ties. Tracking him down wouldn't be easy. But Ramirez had one advantage the original investigators never did: databases and digital footprints. Cross-referencing traffic stops, utility records, and social security traces, the team finally found him, living under an alias in El Paso. The arrest that almost didn't happen. On a humid August morning, Ramirez, Agent Carter, and a joint task force surrounded Ortega's apartment. "Remember," Carter warned, "we only get one shot at this." When they breached the door, Ortega was at the kitchen table eating cereal. His expression barely changed when Ramirez cuffed him. 40 years, Ortega muttered, almost to himself. "And you still found me." But if Ramirez thought the arrest would bring closure, he was wrong. The confession that wasn't. During interrogation, Ortega didn't deny being at the scene, but he refused to admit guilt. "I was there," he said, leaning back in his chair, his hands cuffed. But I didn't kill them. He claimed he'd been camping near the area in August 1975 and stumbled onto something bad. He insisted he touched items, including the bracelet, but never harmed anyone. You think you know the story, Ortega whispered, almost tauntingly, but you don't. You have no idea what was going on back then. It was the first hint that the case might be bigger than anyone had imagined. Uncovering a web of secrets. Digging deeper, Ramirez and Carter uncovered a pattern of unsolved cases in the region during the 1970s, hikers, campers, and drifters who vanished without explanation. And Ortega's name kept brushing against the edges of several of them, though never sticking. It was as if someone had been cleaning up after him, or protecting him. This raised a chilling possibility. Was Ortega working alone, or was there something larger at play? Setting the stage for the trial. By the end of 2013, Ortega was indicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial was set for the following spring, and the case consumed the town. Reporters swarmed court hearings. True crime podcasts devoted entire seasons to the case. Documentaries pitched competing theories. For Keelan and Crystal's families, though, the noise meant little. After decades of silence, they wanted only one thing: the truth. But as the prosecution built its case, troubling inconsistencies surfaced, threatening to unravel everything they thought they knew. The air inside the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office felt heavier than usual. After decades of dead ends, false leads, and unanswered questions, the cold case unit finally had something tangible, something real. Detective Alejandro Ramirez stood over the evidence board, eyes locked on a photo of Sarah Morris. Red string connected her to Sam Nordquist, to the abandoned campsite, to the fragment of DNA recently tested with technology unavailable back in 1975. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights, until Ramirez finally broke it. "She's been hiding in plain sight," he said, his voice low but edged with disbelief. Agent Emily Carter crossed her arms, shifting her weight as she studied the wall of photos and documents. "Not hiding," she corrected. "Waiting. There's a difference. A trail of secrets." The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. In 2023, a cold storage facility cataloging decades-old evidence discovered a mislabeled box. Inside, preserved under outdated sealing methods, were several cigarette butts collected from the edge of the creek where Sam's jacket had been found. New DNA analysis confirmed it. Sarah Morris's genetic profile matched. At first, the team thought it was a mistake. Sarah had been interviewed in 1975 as a passerby who claimed she'd seen a group of teenagers near the site. She was barely 20 back then and presented herself as just another concerned local. No one suspected her of anything. Now, nearly 50 years later, the picture was changing. Ramirez reviewed her life history. Sarah had never left Jefferson County. She'd married young, divorced quietly, worked a series of jobs no one remembered, and blended into the background. But in interviews with locals, a different narrative emerged. Sarah was known for wandering the woods late at night. She had an obsession with the creek area where Sam's body was found. She'd been overheard muttering about secrets no one should ever uncover. Surveillance and strategy. Once the connection was made, Ramirez and Carter began coordinating around the clock. Sarah still lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, deep in the woods, barely a mile from where Sam had last been seen alive. "That's not a coincidence," Carter said as she scrolled through satellite images. "She never left the scene of the crime." For weeks, they conducted covert surveillance. Night 1, they parked a mile down the road, watching her cabin lights flicker on and off. Night 3, Sarah drove into town at 2:13 a.m., bought groceries, and returned without speaking to anyone. Night 7, she burned something in a rusted barrel behind her house. The team collected the ash, which later tested positive for synthetic fibers consistent with 1970s-era hiking jackets. Ramirez's instincts screamed that she knew the investigation was closing in, confronting the past. Meanwhile, the Nordquist family, or what remained of it, had mixed reactions. Sam's younger sister, Ellen, now in her 60s, had waited her entire life for this moment. In an interview, her voice trembled. "I used to dream about the knock on the door," she said. "The one where someone would tell me they caught the person who took my brother. But now, I don't know if I want to know." Ellen's hesitation weighed heavily on Ramirez. He'd seen this before, families torn between relief and devastation when the truth finally surfaced. Building the case. By late October 2024, the investigation had transformed into a full-scale operation. The sheriff's office worked with the FBI to compile A forensic timeline linking Sarah's DNA to multiple pieces of evidence. Witness statements placing her near the campsite on the night Sam disappeared. Handwritten journals recovered from her trash, filled with cryptic entries about the night everything changed. One particular entry, dated August 18, 1975, chilled the room. I told him to stop. He wouldn't listen. The river knows. Carter closed the journal and looked at Ramirez. This isn't just evidence, she said quietly. This is a confession. The tension breaks. On November 3, 2024, the team executed a search warrant on Sarah's property. The cabin smelled of damp earth and mildew. Faded newspaper clippings about Sam's disappearance lined the walls. Under a loose floorboard, investigators recovered a small, rusted tin containing fragments of fabric, later confirmed to be from Sam's hoodie. Ramirez crouched beside the find, jaw tightening. She kept trophies, he muttered. As the evidence mounted, Sarah's world began to shrink. The final move. On November 12, 2024, Sarah Morris was invited to the sheriff's office to clarify her 1975 statement. Inside the interrogation room, she sat across from Ramirez and Carter. Her hands rested calmly on the table, her piercing blue eyes locked on Ramirez's face. Ramirez, Sarah, we've gone over the statements, the evidence, the DNA. It all points to you. Sarah smiles faintly. It's funny, detective. You've spent 50 years chasing shadows. And you think you finally caught one. Carter, this isn't a shadow. It's your DNA on the cigarette butts. It's Sam's hoodie under your floorboards. Sarah, or maybe the woods just hold on to secrets. Ever think of that? The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Sarah refused to confess, but she didn't deny anything either. Ending the chase. By the end of November, prosecutors had enough to move forward. Sarah was formally charged with the 1975 murder of Sam Nordquist. For Jefferson County, it was the end of an era. But for Ellen and the Nordquist family, closure came with a different kind of pain. I thought I wanted justice, Ellen said softly outside the courthouse. But all I feel is empty. The sun had barely risen when unmarked black SUVs rolled silently through the narrow streets, their tinted windows reflecting the pale morning light. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to your skin like a warning. For the residents of this quiet Washington suburb, it was just another Tuesday morning. For the detectives inside those vehicles, it was the culmination of decades of unanswered questions. Detective Alejandro Ramirez sat in the passenger seat of the lead SUV, his fingers drumming nervously on his knee. He had waited nearly 50 years for this moment, to bring the man who had haunted this case, and this town, into custody. Targets inside, whispered Special Agent Emily Carter, eyes locked on the small, aging house at the end of the block. No signs of movement. No visitors for the last 48 hours. His alone. Ramirez nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. After all these years, he muttered under his breath. The setup. Inside the command van parked nearby, digital surveillance feeds flickered across screens. Technicians monitored thermal imaging, drones hovered silently overhead, and tactical officers went through their final checks. On one monitor, the suspect's silhouette moved across the living room, slow, deliberate, almost eerily calm. This wasn't just any suspect. This was Harold Hal Whitman, a 72-year-old retired carpenter who had managed to stay completely off the radar for decades. No priors, no arrests, nothing but an unassuming paper trail. Yet every new piece of DNA evidence pointed squarely at him. Agent Carter double-checked her Glock before sliding it into her holster. Remember, she said, addressing the team, he's lived half a century believing he got away with it. Cornered animals lash out. We do this by the book. Ramirez swallowed hard. He wasn't just thinking about safety, he was thinking about Keelan Schultz and Crystal Turner. About the photographs that had haunted case files for years. About the mothers who had gone to their graves without answers. The arrest. At 6:14 a.m., the order came through. Execute. The team moved like a single, well-oiled machine. 2 tactical units breached the front and back simultaneously. The sound of a battering ram smashing against wood shattered the stillness of the morning. Sheriff's Department. FBI. Don't move. Inside, Hal Whitman froze mid-step, holding a chipped coffee mug in one hand. His eyes darted between the front door and the hallway, instinctively calculating escape routes. But there was nowhere to run. Within seconds, he was pinned face down on the faded carpet, wrists locked in cold steel. You're under arrest for the murders of Keelan Schultz and Crystal Turner, Ramirez said firmly, his voice betraying none of the storm raging inside him. Hal didn't speak. He didn't protest. He didn't even blink. His silence was unnerving, almost rehearsed. The interrogation. At the county sheriff's office, Hal sat in a gray interview room, his hands cuffed to the steel table. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, giving the room a cold, oppressive feel. Detective Ramirez entered first, placing a manila folder on the table with deliberate weight. Agent Carter followed, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, observing. Hal sipped slowly from a paper cup of water, his lined face unreadable. Hal, Ramirez began calmly, sliding a photo from the folder across the table. It was Keelan and Crystal, smiling in the sunlight, just days before their deaths. These women, they deserve your truth. Hal stared at the photo for a long moment, then set it aside without a word. You think silence is gonna save you? Carter asked sharply. We have your DNA, Hal. It's on the rope. It's under their fingernails. You were there. For the first time, Hal's jaw twitched. Ramirez leaned in, lowering his voice. Do you know what it's like to sit with their families? To hear their mothers ask me if they died scared. Hal shifted in his chair, his shoulders stiffening. You've been carrying this for 50 years, Ramirez pressed. Don't you want to put it down? Cracks in the armor. Hal's lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, his breathing grew heavier, his fingers drumming restlessly against the cold table. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he muttered. They wouldn't stop screaming. Carter straightened instantly. Ramirez froze, watching him carefully. Hal's gaze drifted, unfocused, like he was trapped in a memory he couldn't escape. It was supposed to be easy, he continued, his voice distant. Just scare them. That's all. But she scratched me, deep. I lost it. Ramirez swallowed hard, fighting to keep his composure. Why, Hal? He asked softly. Why them? Hal's breathing hitched, his knuckles white against the steel table. They saw something, he said finally, his voice trembling. I couldn't let them. The full confession. For the next 3 hours, Hal talked. He recounted every detail, from how he had followed Keelan and Crystal's van to their secluded campsite, to how he approached them under the cover of darkness. How an argument escalated. How fear turned into violence. He even described the exact locations where he had discarded evidence, places investigators had searched countless times but had never looked deep enough. By the time he finished, Ramirez sat back in his chair, emotionally drained. Carter exhaled slowly. You understand what happens next, Hal, she said firmly. Hal nodded numbly, his voice hollow. I've been waiting for this knock on the door for years, he whispered. Guess I knew it was coming. Aftermath. News of the arrest spread like wildfire. For the families of Keelan and Crystal, the moment was bittersweet. It doesn't bring them back, Keelan's father said tearfully at a press conference. But now we finally know. The community, long haunted by whispers and speculation, found itself grappling with a new reality. The boogeyman they had imagined for decades wasn't a shadowy stranger or mythical figure. He was an ordinary man, living quietly among them. And perhaps that was the most unsettling truth of all. As Hal was led away in shackles, Ramirez watched silently from the observation deck. The weight of the case, of decades lost and lives destroyed, hung heavy on his shoulders. But something about Hal's words gnawed at him. They saw something. It wasn't random. It wasn't just a crime of opportunity. There was something bigger, something Hal was still keeping buried. Ramirez turned to Carter, his voice low. This isn't over, he said. After decades of uncertainty, the courtroom became the stage where truth would finally be tested. For the families of Keelan Schultz and Crystal Turner, this wasn't just about a conviction, it was about answers, closure, and the chance to reclaim their loved ones' stories. Jury selection and tension. Camera pans across the polished wood paneling of the courtroom. Reporters pack the benches. Family members sit rigidly, eyes fixed ahead. At the prosecution table, District Attorney Claire Thompson flips through her notes with clinical precision. Across from her, Defense Attorney Mark Ellis leans back slightly, exuding quiet confidence. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. Prosecutors argued they had the evidence. Defense claimed it was circumstantial. But every person in that room knew, the outcome would ripple far beyond these walls. Opening statements. District Attorney Thompson, firm, steady. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a story about trust. Two young women, Keelan Schultz and Crystal Turner, believed they were safe beneath Utah's quiet skies. But on that August night, someone they knew, someone they trusted, made sure they never came home. Gasps from the gallery. Keelan's father clutches a folded photo of his daughter. The defense counters immediately. Defense attorney Ellis, measured, persuasive. The state wants you to believe they've solved a decade-old mystery. But what they've brought you is speculation stitched together with emotion. No DNA. No eyewitness. No confession you can trust. Evidence and witnesses. Montage of exhibits projected on courtroom screens. Grainy surveillance footage of a pickup truck leaving the mob campsite. Soil samples matching those found beneath the suspect's tires. Text messages between Keelan, Crystal, and a friend they feared. The star witness is Detective Alejandro Ramirez, the lead investigator. Detective Ramirez, on the stand. We re-examined everything, every photo, every report. It wasn't until new forensic technology became available that we found the match. That was the break we'd waited 10 years for. On cross-examination, the defense pounces. Defense attorney Ellis. Detective, isn't it true that in 2015, your department closed this case citing insufficient evidence? Ramirez, firm. Yes. But insufficient evidence doesn't mean insufficient guilt. The jury scribbles notes. The weight of history hangs thick in the air. Families take the stand. Keelan's father, Sean Paul Schultz, takes the stand, holding back tears. Sean Paul. Keelan she was light. You never had to guess what she was thinking. She wore her heart out here. Taps his chest. For 10 years, we woke up every morning thinking today might be the day we'd learn who did it. Today. I'm begging you, don't let her death be another cold case. Crystal's mother, Nancy Turner, follows, voice trembling but resolute. Nancy. We buried our daughter not knowing why. Every birthday, every holiday, empty. If this jury can give us anything, let it be the truth. The gallery sobs quietly. Even the bailiff looks away, jaw tight. The turning point. Then comes the bombshell. Prosecutors reveal a recorded jailhouse conversation between the suspect and a cellmate. Suspect, recording, muffled. They don't know what really happened out there, they'll never find it. Though vague, the words land like dynamite. Jurors lean forward, whispering among themselves. The defense objects, arguing hearsay, but the judge allows it. After weeks of testimony, the trial comes down to a single question. Did the evidence finally connect the dots? District Attorney Thompson, passionate, unwavering. 2 women trusted the wrong person. He took their lives, buried their voices, and thought time would erase his sins. But time doesn't erase evidence. And time doesn't erase justice. Defense Attorney Ellis, smooth, confident. Ladies and gentlemen, if you take nothing else from this trial, take this, doubt. Reasonable doubt. It's been 10 years. The state has theories. They have assumptions. What they don't have is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury retires. Verdict. 3 days later. SFX, clock ticking. Reporters shuffle. Families grip hands. The jury foreperson stands. Jury foreperson. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. Keelan's father collapses into his hands. Crystal's mother sobs openly. Across the aisle, the suspect stares ahead, expressionless. After a decade of silence, the verdict reverberated like thunder. But for the families, this wasn't victory. It was survival. Sentencing and aftermath. At sentencing, Nancy Turner speaks directly to the defendant. Nancy, through tears. You took my baby, but you don't get to take my peace. We choose to remember the love they gave, not the evil you showed. The judge imposes 2 consecutive life sentences. Ripples through the community. Outside the courthouse, cameras flash as reporters swarm. Some locals breathe easier, grateful for closure. Others still wrestle with old fears, whispering about the campground murders whenever dusk falls. Urban myths linger. Some believe there was a second accomplice, someone who still walks free. Narrator, V.O. Justice came, but scars remain. The mountains of Moab still hold their secrets, and for many, the shadows haven't lifted. Reflection and legacy. We end with a quiet shot, 2 crosses adorned with flowers, tucked beneath the aspens where Keelan and Crystal once camped. In the silence of the Utah wilderness, you can still feel them here. Keelan. Crystal. 2 souls bound by love, taken too soon, but never forgotten. If you or someone you know has information about an unsolved homicide, Call the National Homicide Tip Line at 1-800-555-0147. The trial was over. The cameras were packed away, the reporters had left town, and the courthouse steps, once a chaotic circus of microphones and speculation, sat eerily silent. But for the families, the pain didn't fade with the verdict. If anything, it deepened. This was the part of the story the headlines never captured, the long, quiet aftershock that rippled through every corner of their lives. The family's wounds. For Janet Schultz, Keelan's mother, there was no sense of victory. The guilty verdict hadn't brought her daughter back. Her once vibrant home, once filled with laughter and weekend family dinners, now carried an oppressive stillness. People think closure comes with justice, she whispered to an interviewer months later. But there's no such thing as closure when you bury your child. Justice just means someone else carries part of the weight now. Crystal's brother, Evan Turner, echoed that sentiment. He still drove by the old campsite where his sister and Keelan were last seen alive. He admitted he couldn't help himself. He'd park just down the gravel road and stare at the clearing, haunted by questions he'd never get answers to. I still hear her laugh sometimes, he said softly. Like she's right there in the passenger seat. And then I realize it's just in my head, and it's like losing her all over again. The weight on the investigators. For detectives like Ramirez, the case had been a professional and personal crucible. He had stared at dead ends for years, haunted by the feeling that he had failed the victims' families. When the break finally came, new DNA analysis tying the suspect directly to the crime, it was a bittersweet moment. I wanted to scream, cry, and punch a wall all at once, Ramirez admitted. Because yeah, we got him, but why the hell did it take so long? How many sleepless nights could we have saved these families if we'd had this tech 5, 10 years earlier? For him, the case became a symbol of a larger, systemic issue, the gaping cracks in cold case investigations. The role of technology. This case became one of the first in Utah to demonstrate the power of genetic genealogy. A single partial DNA sample collected decades earlier, too degraded for analysis back then, had finally been processed using new techniques. That led investigators to a distant relative, then to a family tree, and finally to the suspect. It was a breakthrough that sparked nationwide conversations. Lawmakers began pushing for expanded funding for cold case units. Families of other missing persons started demanding reviews of old evidence. This case taught us that the answers are sometimes already in our possession, said Agent Emily Carter of the FBI. We just haven't had the right tools, or the right pressure, to see them. Urban myths dispelled. For the town of Moab, the case had lived in the realm of myth for years. Stories had twisted into urban legends, the ghost of La Salle Creek, the nomad killer, whispers of a mysterious drifter who vanished into the desert. When the truth finally came out, it shook the community. This wasn't a ghost story, said Vanessa, a local investigative journalist. It was something far scarier. It was someone hiding in plain sight, living among us. And we didn't see it. The revelation forced many in the town to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about the killer, but about their own blind spots, biases, and assumptions. Grace and rage. For the families, reactions diverged. Some found forgiveness, eventually. Others never would. Keelan's father, Michael, surprised everyone at the sentencing hearing when he stood and addressed the court. I don't forgive you. I don't think I ever will. But I refuse to let my hatred for you define the rest of my life. You took my daughter, but you don't get to take me too. Crystal's mother, by contrast, refused to speak at all. Her silence, as she later explained, was deliberate. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of hearing my voice. He doesn't get that. The broader impact. The case reignited national debates on issues beyond just technology. Victim advocacy. Families demanded better resources, including mental health support and legal assistance. Law enforcement transparency. Why had the original investigation failed to connect critical dots? Public trust. Small-town law enforcement faced backlash for earlier missteps, leading to sweeping policy changes. In the months after the trial, the state launched a cold case review board tasked with revisiting hundreds of unsolved murders across Utah. Keelan and Crystal's families were among the first to testify before lawmakers, urging them not to let other families languish in limbo. Lingering questions. Even with the suspect behind bars, parts of the narrative remained stubbornly incomplete. Why had it taken so long for key witnesses to come forward? Was there someone else involved who had never been charged? And why had the suspect picked Keelan and Crystal in the first place? Some answers may never come. A lasting legacy. 2 years later, the The families gathered at a small ceremony near La Salle Creek, where a memorial bench had been placed overlooking the water. It bore a simple inscription. In memory of Keelan and Crystal. Loved fiercely. Gone too soon. Evan Turner, speaking to the crowd, summed it up best. People keep telling us to move on. But we don't move on, we move forward. We carry them with us. Every day. Keelan and Crystal's story became more than a murder case. It became a testament to persistence, to technological progress, and to the unyielding power of love. 4 years, the desert kept its secrets. 4 years, families lived with unbearable silence. And then, one small piece of evidence, one fragment of DNA, cracked the case wide open. But the real story isn't just about catching a killer. It's about the lives lost, the lives left behind, and the lessons we carry forward. Some cases are about justice. This one was also about time. Because time doesn't heal everything. But sometimes, just sometimes, it delivers answers. The courtroom was silent now. The gavel had fallen hours ago, sealing the fate of the man everyone thought was a ghost for nearly 5 decades. For the families of Keelan Schultz and Crystal Turner, closure wasn't clean. It never is. Justice, they realized, doesn't bring back laughter. It doesn't fill empty chairs at family dinners. It only stops the bleeding, it doesn't heal the wound. As cameras and reporters swarmed outside, Detective Alejandro Ramirez stood on the courthouse steps, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. A cold wind swept across the plaza, rustling the case files in his hand. He thought he was done. He thought, finally, he could breathe. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, answering only because instinct told him to. Detective Ramirez, a distorted voice crackled on the other end. You think it's over. It's not. What happened to Keelan and Crystal, that was never about them. It was a warning. Ramirez froze. Who is this? The line went dead. Across town, investigative journalist Vanessa Torres was packing up her camera gear when she received an email with no subject line and no sender. Inside was a single photograph, a faded Polaroid of a young woman, bound, terrified, dated August 17, 1975. Attached was a message. You got the wrong man. Dig deeper. Her heart pounded as she forwarded the image to Ramirez. Within minutes, he was on his way to her apartment. 2 hours later, the two sat across from each other, the photo spread out on Vanessa's coffee table. The image was grainy, but the fear in the girl's eyes was unmistakable. This can't be real, Ramirez muttered, running a hand down his face. The guy we arrested confessed. The evidence matched. Case closed. Vanessa shook her head. Or maybe that's exactly what someone wanted us to believe. Before either could say more, Ramirez's phone rang again. This time it was Agent Emily Carter from the FBI. You need to come to Black Hollow, she said flatly. Now. Why? Because, she paused, as if weighing whether to say it, we just found another body. And detective, it's wearing the same clothes Keelan was last seen in. In a quiet corner of Utah, one cold case has just reopened, but what investigators are about to uncover will change everything. Then, the ominous music swells as the narrator teases the next episode. What if the killer you thought was behind bars never worked alone? What if another predator has been hunting, undetected, for 50 years?